stress and issues there are when some of the serious enforcement or serious guidance comes when ecosystems are already built out. That's obviously not the ideal place. And so I think you are quite timely, but frankly, the moments are urgent because, as you'll hear from some of the speakers, many of the incredibly hard decisions balancing utility and data protection, balancing safety and data protection, integrating identity and payment, and all of the cultural nuances around the world that need to be interpreted properly are being dealt with today by thought leaders, by technologists, by experts. And it's obviously critical for the data protection authorities of the world to deeply understand how these technologies are developing. So let me jump in. As you may be aware, our goal here is to consider the emerging concepts around digital identity in these worlds, the evolution of platforms and their responsibilities, and the responsibilities of the many apps and third parties and other stakeholders that are engaged, the developing legislation around the world that is increasingly seeking to shape these rules, the current governance mechanisms, where they're standing today, where there are lacking, how are fundamental rights being considered, and then, of course, in this world where AI seems to dominate so many conversations, this is a particular environment where it's AI that is driving some of the advances and some of the challenges and some of the solutions around automated decisions to try to provide safety and abuse and biases, but also obviously all of the challenges that we have around AI are, magnified in many cases when you have the visceral reality of these things jumping off screens and interacting with users. So I'm going to turn to our panelists. I'll give them a very quick, just name introduction, and we'll ask them to add a little bit more detail about their work, and then jump into the topics. Kavya Pearlman, hi Kavya, founder and CEO of XRSI, the XR Reality Safety Intelligence, one of the early leaders working at the intersection of both privacy and safety and trust issues. Dr. Jane Thomason, founder of Supernova Data, and Daniel Monastersky. Daniel is the director of the Center for Cybersecurity and Data Protection at the University of CEMA. Kavya, I'll turn to you to open, please.
Thanks, Jules. So yes, one of the earlies, I would say, but it still kind of feels a little bit too late to me, especially when I see how fast things are converging. And I think that's a kind of a keyword that I would like to root today is, Jules, you already mentioned artificial intelligence. There is the virtual reality. So my background, I was the head of security at one of the oldest existing virtual world called Second Life. The Linden Lab is the company. And then prior to that, in 2016, I was advising Facebook for third-party security in 2016, during 2016 US elections, etc. So these kinds of experience led me to believe this, sort of watch through how this is converging. And then if we only just take legal perspective, not just technical, not also technical, but just legal perspective, then there is a lot when it comes to safety, human rights. That multi-stakeholder perspective has to be considered, and the convergence of these technologies. And that's why, when people kind of sometimes roll their eyes on this term called Metaverse, we really have to think about the convergence of these technologies is going to create an immersive internet. And that's kind of where my passion is. I have a background in cybersecurity, so I look at it like, what are the bad guys going to do? How is it going to violate, and this is very personal to me, identity? How is it going to violate women in Iran or women in Saudi Arabia, women in India, or women in America or Global South, their rights, where sometimes rights may not even be available? So that's kind of where I'm coming from, but I look forward to this discussion. Thanks, Jules.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Kavya. And Dr. Jane Thomason, founder of Supernova Data. Tell us a bit about what that is and your opening perspective on the issues on the table here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, yeah, my name's Jane Thomason, and I have a long career actually in the health industry, but I moved into technology in around 2016. And I've been through the journey from blockchain to DeFi to NFTs to DAOs to the metaverse. And in the metaverse, the issues that are of concern to me are those that we're talking about today, which are around governance, privacy, human rights, and particularly ethical issues. So I write and I speak and I try and envision people about the opportunities of these new worlds, but also some of the issues related to the new worlds. I think Kavya is one of the most awesome people in the world working on this, and I'm proud to be on a panel with her, and I look forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Daniel Monastersky, Director of the Center for Cybersecurity and Data Protection at the University of CEMA. Daniel is going to be speaking in Spanish. Daniel, please.
Sí, ¿qué tal? Muchas gracias. Bueno, la verdad que es muy interesante. Yo no soy especialista en metaverso, nunca pensé que iba a tener que desarrollar una idea respecto de los riesgos que hay en el metaverso. Sí estoy muy involucrado con todo lo relacionado a las identidades digitales, a la suplantación de identidad, a la reputación online, y para mí es fundamental que, que se haga hincapié, como decía Kavya recién, en todos los riesgos que existen y sobre todo en la necesidad de concientizar y de educar a la sociedad respecto de todos los riesgos que pueden desarrollarse en este tipo de entornos virtuales. Yo siempre hablo que existe una identidad digital. Esta identidad digital es la que nosotros generalmente queremos que se conozca. Nosotros podemos tener un montón de profesiones, oficios, que podemos tener alguna idea respecto de actuar, de tener algún tipo de relación con el arte, pero a grandes rasgos uno elige va a ser la identidad o cómo queremos que nos conozcan a través de entornos digitales. Y por otro lado está la reputación online, que es justamente algo que no podemos manejar, que es una construcción que hacen los terceros a partir de opiniones y obviamente de sesgos relacionados con nosotros en particular, ¿no? Y para finalizar esta primera etapa, todo esto desemboca en una frase que yo siempre digo hace muchos años, que es, uno es lo que Google dice que sos. Entonces, a partir de ahí, tomar conciencia y obviamente hacer lo que sea necesario para poder minimizar los riesgos que existen a la hora de estar en entornos digitales, ¿no? Muchas gracias.
Can I ask you all to let's drill down a little bit on what one of the key topics, here was, which is digital identity specifically. And Kavya, coming initially from the sort of safety and security focus, we often see today, whether it's social media or other online places, demands for authentic, verified identity to know who's a child, to know who's a criminal, to know who's committed a problem and is going to be sanctioned or kicked off, to know who's dealing with hate speech or bullying. But we've also obviously always seen pushback from privacy authorities or privacy advocates who've wanted, the right to be anonymous, the right to speak freely. In the US, there are certainly strong, commitments to anonymous speech. The conflict with regulators on the safety side, whether it's child safety or law enforcement. What's been your experience? Is this an area where we should expect that verified identity is going to be the norm? Are there in between, gradations? What are the challenges and conflicts between maintaining a healthy, trusted environment and then the challenges of mandating firm digital identities?
Yeah, Jules, it's a very important question. Also, one of the, I think I would like to add two words there. One is scalability. And so you have to think about, we're scaling it to millions and billions of people, and that's where the challenge comes. And when we're trying to scale these things, then we have to, and I may sound like I'm speaking the language of some of the big tech platforms, but those trade-offs have to be made. It's almost like you can't have encrypted communication end to end and also have entirely safe communication, because people can introduce all kinds of really bad things in the encryption. So we have to make these trade-offs. So you can't have completely anonymous communication or anonymous identity and yet be like, oh, that's a criminal, that's not. So in order to ensure a bit of safety, these trade-offs have to be made. Now, the problem is happening where, yes, we can use some privacy preserving identity management, etc., is when these choices are being made by companies and corporations. So let's say, it was about a couple of years ago, Meta, Facebook, prior to that, decided that they're going to mandate Facebook login across the virtual reality headsets. And there was a huge backlash. So when those decisions are made for billions of individuals, humans, that's when the concerns arises, because there has to be a multi-stakeholder process to find that balance. There cannot be completely anonymous, not in the metaverse. If we want to have metaverse, there needs to be some exchange of data, some revelation of some of this data that will make the decision, but we can mitigate some of the risk by using some privacy preserving identity management. Anonymity is very challenging to achieve in these virtual experiences. And another thing that is challenging, we're still talking about, hey, digital identity of humans, etc. We have to think about interaction with AI-powered digital humans, where I would proxy myself, I would send my AI agent to potentially attend this kind of a panel because I've programmed it to be like that. Or some other experiences where I could send. So those are really interesting, challenging questions. And I could go on, add more to it, but I'm going to stop there. And let's see what other panelists have to say.
Yes, I'd welcome that. So Kavya, in some sense, says that at the end of the day, somebody may need to know your identity, maybe the platform, although maybe the public could have a pseudonym, or there could be other measures to minimize your identity. But at the end of the day, there's an accountability that might be necessary. Jane, I wonder if you might react. Is there no view that there's a anonymous role to be played? We do see civil society folks calling for this sometimes, for fear that in some countries it'll be too risky, or the law enforcement won't be able to take action when needed, or platforms won't be able to successfully take measures for safety. Is the metaverse a world where anonymity has no place?
Look, I think this is a very complicated question, and I think the answer has to be no. The question is, what is an identity? And I think this is this whole complicated melange of things about, I am me and I am human and I know that I am, but what information about me do I have to share with you in order for you to be confident that I can be on your platform, or I can exchange digital assets, or whatever it is I'm trying to do? And there's obviously a lot of work on these kind of identity preserving approaches that exist. But in the long run, and one of the issues that I'm very concerned about are the issues around ethics in the metaverse and how you actually protect people, and particularly, for example, children. So if you have zero identity identification, then children are entering the metaverse. How do we know who they're interacting with, whether these people are safe? There has to be some way of people being identified in the metaverse in order for us to keep it safe. And as I'm very well aware that persecuted populations and so forth aren't going to want all of their information being made available. But I think that question about being able to control your identity and what people can access in what circumstances is a really important question that we need to get around. But I don't think that we can have a safe, secure metaverse without some kind of ability to be able to identify who you're interacting with.
Daniel, I wonder if you can also reflect on the hope of serious anonymity in this environment.
La tensión entre el anonimato y la prevención de delitos se va a agravar, obviamente, en este tipo de entornos inmersivos. Por ejemplo, la suplantación de identidad va a ser mucho más fácil por la replicación de los rasgos, de biometría de los avatares, que posiblemente pueden llegar a ser controlados por terceros, pero también lo que hablaban recién, limitar el anonimato para justamente evitar delitos a través de Internet, traen aparejados este problema, ¿no? Que es el riesgo para la privacidad y las libertades individuales.
Thank you. What are we seeing developing today around governance mechanisms? Obviously, there are some platforms that are already building out a range of tools that allow users to reflect identity in certain ways, delete data, portability. I'm not quite sure what the state is, data minimization. What are you seeing today in the way a range of companies, and this is clearly not one size fits all, right? I think one point that we made at the discussion in Bermuda is that we should refrain from thinking of the metaverse as like one exact model as reflected by some particular set of companies as some completely virtual environment, but that there are none of us truly knows. Perhaps the experts will have predictions, but none of us knows whether the metaverse is going to be some better version of this Zoom where we'll have better avatars and be able to sniff each other and tap each other and shake hands and feel more physically connected, but we'll be sitting in front of the screen, or whether it'll be other beyond the phone and beyond the screen environments, or just more powerful versions of the current games. I've got a college age gamer son, and he's transported, even though he's just playing on a laptop screen. But as far as I'm concerned, he can't hear me, he can't see me, he's in his own world with his own so forth, and he doesn't have the additional touch points, but it is quite immersive. So are there any positives that you can point to where we're seeing apps or games or platforms bringing the lessons of data protection law and building them into this infrastructure? We know that this is in many cases a data hungry infrastructure, simply to be able to properly render video properly, and to be able to reflect the identity and track eyes and all of the physical interaction and biometric interaction that is necessary to perform. We know in every other sector, what has been necessary for one purpose ends up becoming part of an ad model, becomes part of a data broker model, becomes part of many other commercial models without necessity and proportionality and fairness necessarily being well applied. What's your snapshot on what you see? Do you see model examples that should be replicated, or are we heading for a painful clash? Start with Kavya.
Sure. So it's a very complex sort of a thing to break down to. So let me break it down to the way I was trying to think about these issues back at Linden. That's where I kind of started to be like, okay, identity, when we are connecting in the metaverse, connecting means socializing, social VR, social, meeting another person, then I need to authenticate, hey, I am Kavya, I am this person, I'm a human, etc., etc. Then there is the connect, there is the creation, like who created this thing? That, what comes to mind is non-fungible tokens type of things. is when we can route some kind of a technical measure to ensure that this object can be identified to its root, where it's coming from, the source, the authentication, etc. And then there is the third aspect within the metaverse, which is commerce. And then comes to mind KYC, and then that KYC, if we have seen anything come through this whole Web3, some of these very scammy stuff, kind of a lot of these cases have come out where big companies have gone bust and stuff, that KYC has become so important. And that's why now suddenly the industry is hailing Coinbase for sticking to that kind of a measure, because like Binance and other stuff is going sort of bust. So there are these connect, create, commerce, these pillars where the context of this identity stuff is different. If I'm just hanging out in a social virtual world and I am representing myself as a tree, and I should be kind of allowed that. I'm not violating anybody's rights. I have my autonomy to choose whatever avatar representation I want. So these are the, three, kind of pillars that I thought of from a risk perspective. Like but when I start to transact, I can't claim to be just a tree and transact about $100 million of an asset within some kind of a virtual reality platform, or even like above 200. This was the issue with, Second Life and all these virtual platforms. So we have to really contextualize what exactly is the context with which I'm using this identity, and then allow that sort of sense of freedom to the individual users, like a child just hanging out in a very child-friendly, age-appropriate environment. Well, if they want to be a car, a tree, or however they want to represent their likeness in a game world, it's okay. However, a doctor who's performing surgery using these augmented reality glasses, who's using artificial intelligence, they need to actually ensure. Now, the problem is, whenever we do that, there is so much data that we are already giving away. And the new form of identity that currently, XRSI is actually working on a research where we see a departure from password. It used to be, I'm going to use a bit of a technical terms here, but something you know, something you have, something you are. And so this used to be the case, and now we are going towards something we are. So the data that we are giving away, the inferred data, that becomes the identity. And it almost might be inevitable because we have to differentiate ourselves as humans against the artificial intelligence identity, like a digital twin. So that's the only way, and we have to sit together and figure out where is the balance of that exchange of data.
Jane, I'm going to violate what I was intending to ask, because I realized that you mentioned that you had done some work on blockchain. I wonder, could you explain to this audience, we very often hear blockchain linked to the metaverse conversation, and obviously it has a real link to identity as well. What's the relevance and importance of blockchain or distributed ledgers when it comes to this environment in particular?
To Jane?
Jane.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Sorry, I didn't realize it was for me. Yeah, I think that's a really important question, because the way that I look at metaverses is that we've got hundreds and hundreds of companies that are building them, and this is a challenge with governance. But I group them in four ways. First of all, you've got the big techs, you've got Facebook, Google, Amazon, and so forth. And my view is that they're going to use the same business models as they've got, and they're going to potentially offer people a virtual experience. So they'll still be extractive, they'll still use your data, they'll still on-sell your data, but you'll get a digital experience. And a lot of people are going to use that because they've already got 2 to 3 billion users. The second group who've also got 3 billion users are the gamers. And so if they start using blockchain to allow people to be able to buy, sell, and exchange assets within those gaming communities, then they're going to create these significant economies within what has been Web 2 gaming. The third group are the people who are really trying to build this new version of the internet, the decentralized metaverse, where everyone gets rewarded for their effort and which is truly decentralized. So that's, Sandbox and Decentraland. And then I think you have the governments who are trying to figure out, well, can I actually provide my government services better using a metaverse experience? So I think we've got at least 4 different groups of people with different objectives, different consumer bases who are all working on the metaverse. Some of them are underpinned by blockchain and some of them are not underpinned by blockchain. So that's kind of my first comment. But I want to go on, because if you think about that, then you've got this kind of melange of all of these different groups who are building immersive experiences, some of which are decentralized, some of which are not. Then how do you think about governance? Because, people like Katja and me, we can think about how we would want identity to be framed, how we would want KYC to be done. But there's no one who can actually legislate or ensure that this happens. And so what we're seeing in Metaverse is groups like the Catchers Group and others who are saying, we need to be thinking about this. How can we think about this? Let us contribute to the thinking. But if you think about the governance of the world that we have at the moment, where we have countries and we have the UN and we have the G7 and we have the G20, and then I've already mentioned 2 groups of people who aren't represented in any of them, like the big techs and the gamers. We don't have a governance setup that's actually capable of enforcing or ensuring or pushing the implementation of standards around KYC, human rights, ethical data governance, and so on. So I actually think we're in a period of time where we really need some significant rethinking about the governance of the internet and the governance of things like Metaverse. And it's people like everyone who's in this conversation that are contributing, that are trying to take that thinking forward in a system that's actually not built for a digital borderless environment, which is the one we're going into.
Well, I do think that one of the dramas that we're seeing around AI is many new entrants, new regulators, new players coming to the issue as if it's a new area to be regulated, unaware of the fact that, well, data protection law with mandates around fairness and proportionality and minimization and automated decisions is already the current regulator for those jurisdictions that have robust data protection law. And any of the organizations building these tools who are subject to the jurisdiction of those countries already have a very certain roadmap. That doesn't mean that there aren't, conflicts with other issues and other balances as they are always when it comes to any new uses of data and technology. So I do urge this community to remind many of the new players who are wondering who's regulating this and so forth. Well, there is already a regulatory community that has authority to enforce activities. Daniel, and then I'm going to ask each of you to give us sort of a kind of, I'll say, closing thought or a point that we didn't get that you want to raise, and we'll turn to the audience for questions. So those who are listening in, please do consider items that you would like to raise. So Daniel, either the blockchain intersection or where you're seeing positive or negative examples of companies, platforms applying data protection principles. I do know that we do see some organizations telling us that, well, yes, perhaps we're tracking eyes, but that doesn't mean we need to have a unique biometric. We just need to know the distance between your eyes. That's not a unique item, so forth. Or we're keeping data only on the device. We're not sending it off. That might have competitive issues with third parties, but on the other hand, obviously, data that doesn't go off doesn't go on and off, forever. So we're certainly seeing the emergence of some semblance of minimization or deletion, but it's not clear, I think, how ubiquitous those are. So either of those two, welcome your thought, and then we'll do a quick 1 minute point from each, and we'll open for questions.
Sí, creo, lo que les puedo decir que sobre todo en Latinoamérica ha habido en los últimos 2-3 años con la Ley General de Protección de Datos de Brasil, obviamente una novedad de las buenas relacionadas con la normativa de protección de datos personales. Eso ayudó muchísimo a que otros países de la región se sumaran y avanzaran en proyectos de ley o en reformas de proyectos de ley vinculados con protección de datos. En Argentina, donde yo vivo, hay un proyecto de reforma, ojalá que se apruebe el año que viene, que está muy alineado con la ley brasilera y con el reglamento de protección de datos europeo. Creo que lo que hace falta, y por eso yo hago hincapié, es en todo lo que está relacionado con la concientización, con la educación, con el cambio cultural que se requiere en estas cuestiones. Hablamos de nuevas tecnologías y ahí es donde se hace fundamental todo lo que está relacionado con privacy by design, privacy by default, minimización de datos, después analizar un poco el tema de la portabilidad y sobre todo eso complementándolo con todo lo que es la ciberseguridad. Y solamente para terminar, un ejemplo de algo que se me ocurrió que podría pasar o seguramente ya pasa, es la hiperpersonalización que puede existir en los entornos virtuales respecto de nuestros datos. Yo me imagino caminando en una ciudad del metaverso y que me inunden con información, con publicidad, con imágenes que obviamente estén promocionando productos o publicidades que estén directamente diseñados específicamente para explotar vulnerabilidades personales que se detectan mediante una monitorización invasiva que sucede en el metaverso o en estos entornos inmersivos, ¿no? Entonces, ahí es donde la protección de datos tiene que jugar un papel fundamental, porque en un menor eso puede generar muchos problemas.
Thank you. All right, quick lightning 1 minute. Is there a point that you didn't get to make that you think this audience should hear? And then we'll go to questions. So Kavya, Jane, Daniel, go.
All right. I'm going to do quick. However, I want to make not 1, but 3 points. I hope I can fit that in. But something that when we talk about identity, and we recently at XRSI, we were reviewing Children Online Privacy COPA 2.0 for the United States, the draft version. And we found that sometimes when we are making these laws, specifically, I want to draw the attention towards something that is verifiable. Check the box. We can verify in the lawmaking that this is a person who they are. This is what they told. You can instead, it should be more informed, and it should be both. But we can't leave it just like, oh, we can verify that you gave away all the data. Whereas the individuals, because the complexity and conversions of these technologies, they may not even be informed what they're giving away. They might not be informed what they are signing up for. And that's why, XRSI Privacy and Safety Framework talks about context is important when we talk about consent. Context, choice is important, whether I want to participate. Control over my data and stuff is important. And then it leads further down to even autonomy. Like, do I even have autonomy? Because we are talking about brain-computer interfaces at some point, etc. Another point, and I know I'm taking a little bit more time, but there is the inferred data. We are working on this natural authentication system that automatically, like if I'm just walking around in the metaverse and somebody would be able to tell this is Kavya by the way we are making gestures, etc. And when we get to that point, when our authentication, our human identity is natural, we need to make those trade-offs with multi-stakeholder folks, with technology people. We can't just say, oh, this should not be allowed, because that may be the only way to authenticate whether somebody is a human or an AI. And then we have to, and finally, the third point that I want to make is we have to maintain a decentralized infrastructure for identity, because we can't have this one identity for all, because that would be too much consolidation of power. a singular ID, as kind of Europe is going for digital ID system, well, as a hacker, I would say that's a really like a big gaping hole for all these citizens to create if it gets hacked. But otherwise too, if we allow Chinese government to lead the metaverse identity, then we may be concerned about human rights issues. If we allow just Europeans, then what about Iranians in Saudi Arabia? So this needs to be a more decentralized infrastructure that can kind of interoperate in different jurisdictions. So that's about it, Jill. Thank you.
Thanks. Jane, a quick 1 minute, please.
Yeah, thank you. So completely agree with Katya about the decentralized identity, but want to just really emphasize this issue about data privacy and consent, and the fact that people don't even know what information is being generated by them, because it's going to be a combination of what they're doing plus multiple IoT devices that are all connected that are providing information about them, leading to something that's called biometric psychography, which means the gathering and use of all sorts of data to reveal intimate detail about users' likes, dislikes, and preferences that can be then used to influence them. So I think we've got a really big, complicated question about what is consent and how anyone can be informed.
Thanks. Daniel, a minute, please.
Quería comentar que acá falta, en el metaverso y en estos entornos inmersivos, falta de diversidad, hay una falta de diversidad y representación en la construcción de estos espacios, y tenemos que tener en cuenta que las grandes tecnológicas son las que hoy están llevando a la delantera y son las que están decidiendo cómo va a ser este mundo, ¿no? Entonces, creo que es importante darle voz a los colectivos minoritarios, a los expertos en ética, y que esto redunde en que no se reproduzcan los sesgos discriminatorios, ¿no?
Thank you all. Let me turn to those who are listening for any questions that you would like to raise. Raise a hand or type in the chat if you wish, and I'll give 10 seconds to see if we've got any interventions from the broader group. Aline. Please go ahead, Aline Silla. Aline says that we mentioned different countries, governments, and laws that make governance difficult. Do you already see some concepts to bring these differences together in the future? Does one of you or any of you want to reply to that?
I think I was the one who spoke about that. And I think the issue is understanding the environment that we're dealing with and the differences between the notion of sovereign nation states and the management of economies that traverse multiple sovereign nation states, and then thinking about how you might govern those. And then secondly, how you govern very large industries like the big techs and the gaming and in fact the telecommunications companies that are coming to start to play in this game. And so I think we're in a whole new world that we're all trying to figure out how best to be able to deal with. And I think we're going to deal with it with a combination of countries trying to govern what happens in their country, but we're going to have to create a coalition of the willing, if you like, to think about how we can work across these digital states that move across jurisdictions. And we, in my view, we do not have any current governance body that's capable of thinking about that.
Thanks. I'll simply add that areas where I think there are going to be governance challenges include areas such as the following. Today we have an environment where we have legislative mandates to, scan content and take down hate speech and respond to issues around misinformation and foreign interference, with elections and all of these matters. To the extent that some of the metaverse activity is a bit more, shall we say, virtual, and is not today being recorded, the mandate to record everything one is speaking or saying, when the expectation of the user is that maybe it's ephemeral, it's not a tweet or a post, but the obligation to, we've seen the challenge of both moderating and providing safety issues in real time, interactions. And so some governments and jurisdictions will insist on, a firm hand in being able to capture and report and hold bad actors accountable, and others will have a different trade-off that will seek more, minimization instead of presuming that everybody is a potential, accuser or bullier. Another issue where I think, international standardization will be helpful. We know that when there are different definitions of personal information, it makes it very hard to both, have a standard service across different jurisdictions, as well as for, regulators to have common interpretations. And I think we've seen some convergence over the years around the definitions of personal information, but obviously there are still gaps. And here we have a whole range of, I won't say new, because many of these are not novel, but we've got much more body information, much more, this is not simply a world of facial recognition, but of all sorts of interpersonal aspects. And regulators will need to provide appropriate guidance for where and how they'll be considering some of these unique enough in order to make decisions. And in a world of LLMs and, large foundation models where hyper-personalization may be possible without uniquely identifying an individual, but yet we'll be able to tailor, I think these are areas where convergence is critical. Okay, we turn to closing remarks from the Commissioner. Commissioner Alcala, please.
Sí, muchísimas gracias. Muy buenos días. Tengan todas y todos. Buenas tardes, buenas noches, amigas que nos acompañan desde la virtualidad en esta edición de Diálogos de GPA, el Metaverso, Identidad Digital, Responsabilidades y Regulación. Pues saludo obviamente a todas las personas que han sido ponentes, a Jane Thomason, a Kavya Pearlman, a Daniel Monastersky y a Jules Polonetsky, quien además es como moderador. A mí me lleva una reflexión muy brevemente en donde Pete Cashmore dijo: la privacidad ha muerto y social media la mató. En ese tema creo que es muy importante estas reflexiones, estos diálogos, cuando hablamos precisamente del metaverso, los retos pues que obviamente enfrentamos, no solamente en un ámbito en particular, es decir, en el continente europeo o en Asia o en África. Este tema obviamente es de todas y de todos y por supuesto que tiene gran impacto. El Parlamento Europeo ha definido al metaverso ya de una manera creo que muchísimo, muy clara. Obviamente desde este sentido, desde el incremento del uso de Internet y como consecuencia en la inmersión en el mundo digital, nuestra identidad física ha venido evolucionando hacia también una identidad digital. Hoy hablamos incluso hasta de herencias digitales, precisamente partiendo de la idea de que son identidades y son realidades. Pero también creo que es oportuno y no podemos dejar de hablar sobre este tema en el espacio cívico. Y sobre la identidad digital no hay un solo concepto uniforme o regulado o inmerso en alguna normatividad, por lo que podemos decir que la identidad digital se construye a través de la información que cada persona comparte sobre sí misma en Internet, en diferentes formas o plataformas. Por otro lado, al igual que el mundo real, en el mundo virtual estamos expuestos, por supuesto, a muchísimas vulneraciones. Incluso no podemos hasta saber o podemos anticipar, pues, ¿por qué? Porque en el mundo real sí podemos anticipar o prevenir quizá de una manera mucho más tangible, eso me refiero, no sé, un robo o algún atentado en el mundo real. En el mundo virtual prácticamente si no tomamos las medidas de seguridad adecuadas, pues no sabemos o quedamos pues muy vulnerables. La inseguridad cibernética es un problema que nos aqueja a todas y a todos. Antes eran historias de ciencia ficción. De hecho, cuando empezó a hablarse este tema, recuerdo y recordamos Matrix en 1999, se empezaba a hablar de una realidad. No pensábamos que fuera a ser realidad. Hoy lo estamos viviendo. Y obviamente aprovecho para agradecer este espacio también a mi querida colega, la comisionada Josefina Román, quien por razones de agenda no puede estar hoy con ustedes, pero me pidió dialogar brevemente en un mensaje muy, muy, muy sencillo. Y con esto cierro. Es importante decirlo. Esta red puede llegar incluso a ser, bueno, la red de Internet, perdón, puede llegar a ser incluso, como lo decía, mucho más insegura que las calles en donde vivimos, que las calles por donde transitamos, por lo que es imprescindible ir ya tomando medidas necesarias ante el riesgo. Sin embargo, este camino no lo podemos transitar solo, es decir, solamente autoridades empezar a platicar, a dialogar sobre esto. Necesitamos de la participación activa de sociedad civil, de academia, de expertas, expertos, de comunidad internacional, porque juntos es el único camino en donde podremos transitar. En solitario no se puede transitar y por eso celebro este tipo de diálogos y juntos debemos de explorar y determinar el camino que vamos a seguir como sociedad mundial global para salvaguardar nuestros valores fundamentales en este nuevo, pero también emocionante capítulo de interacción humana, pero que la emoción no esté por encima de la seguridad. Estoy seguro que en este contexto que estamos viviendo siempre podemos hacer más con diferentes visiones, con diferentes realidades, pero juntas y juntos reinventar agendas, modernizar procesos y transformar realidades a la par de lo que hace la tecnología. Muchísimas gracias por su atención.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thanks to the ENI team and good rest. And special thank you, Daniel, Jane, Kavya.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you,
See you at the
everyone.
next dialogues in January.
Thank you.